actually were able to pay directly in, say, Bitcoin, was it a $5 coffee? Was it a 5-cent coffee? Was it a $300 coffee?
I don't know.
By the end of the day, it could be any of those or something else. So it's really, it kind of, I as much as I love and I despise cryptocurrency, and part of what I love about it is honestly what I find fascinating about Trump. Like, it's so obvious. Like, it makes problems that were kind of easy to ignore. Suddenly they're really obvious. And you're like, oh, Jesus, wow, corruption's a real big problem, isn't it? This happens all the time. In cryptocurrency, you're like, oh, man, volatility. Like, this is absurd. This is, like, absurdly stupid how volatile this is.
Yeah.
It makes it almost hard to even use it in any meaningful way other than for speculation.
Right.
So again, if we're going to build a society, we're going to have to give out resources. Until we figure out a way to, make alchemy stupid cheap. Even then, there's still a limit. You're transitioning one element to another. You're not bringing new matter into the world, into the universe. So you have to have a way of getting people enough resources to survive. Fundamentally, we take in resources and we get rid of waste. And so that is going to be central. No matter what else you want to do, you're going to have to solve that problem to have a new society. So I would argue, again, look at what we have with currency. Probably not the best way to do it. While there's a whole bunch of economists that would be, if they were here with us, would be shouting me down, I would argue that currency is not a great model, and it leads to a lot of inefficiency. Now, it leads to a lot of efficiencies as far as creating and saving dollars, but again, it's an imaginary thing. We want efficiencies when it comes to actual resources. We want more water to be available. We want cleaner air. We want more fuel, more electricity, more of actual things that make lives better. We want to maximize the amount of those available to every citizen. And we want to minimize dangerous stuff. And part of the danger is waste, because the more waste there is, the less of the good resources are actually available.
Right.
If you have, a few million acre-feet of water, and you waste half of those, well, you only have 500,000 acre-feet of water. So that's a central thing, and I think that's something that gets overlooked a lot. Oh, economics will figure it out. And I wish I had the articles handy right now. I'll have to send them as an addendum. But there have been some great articles talking about how economics is just brain dead.
Yeah, and just let me know. I'll mark it here, and I'll put them in the show notes. So just send them to me, and I'll link them when I post this.
So that's the first thing. So I guess from there, if we're talking about how would you use technology to build a society. So first of all, education. We're not going to talk about tech and education. I think that's fundamentally mostly a human problem. Then you need to resource management. And so money is maybe not the best technology. It's a way of managing resources, but has some issues. So beyond that, what else do we need? Well, we need to apply those resources. We need food, obviously, one of the most basic ones. And then with that, we need a sewer system. We need a way to get rid of waste, whether it's human waste or other just garbage from different processes. So there's a lot of technologies. I don't have a background in all of those, so I'll leave those for another guest some other time to go over.
That's fine.
How we optimize.
Or you can come back on later. And there's no limit.
I'll do a little research. But yeah, you need, and there's obviously technological advances in terms of we can drill wells for water, we can capture rainwater, we can condense water out of the air. There's a lot of places we can pull water from.
Right.
Likewise, I'm actually fascinated when it comes to food. Vertical farming is that's the term they finally settled on.
Yeah. I'm huge on that, man. Have you heard of Bambox?
No.
I did some photography for them, and we did actually kind of a form in that. We did a trade for. Nice. They gave me a month free, and I gave them some nice photos used for their Instagram. But they're out they started in downtown. They're out in Scottsdale now.
Okay. And
they're doing indoor. It's going to probably become vertical. I think they want to actually start in the basement and kind of go up. But you get a subscription. They send you it every week, or you can go to the farmer's market to pick it up.
What are they growing?
They're growing romaine. They're growing broccoli sprouts. Some other really cool thing that's like a anti-carcinogen. The Aztecs, I guess, used to grow it a bunch. And then the Westerners came in.
Is it like maca or something?
No, it's not maca. I don't know. It starts with like an A or something. It's some plant that you wouldn't have heard about that they kind of found, and it's kind of green.
Superfood.
Yeah, it is exactly what it is. It's like apparently it was big back in the Mayans days. And
I say eat what tastes good because if there were an actual superfood, like they always want to charge you $50 for fruit juice or whatever the fancy thing in the moment is, if one of those truly existed, there'd be some dude, some woman somewhere on the planet, 200 years old. They'd be like, you got to try some of this. There isn't?
Well,
so eat what tastes
we can argue about that later. But, yeah, I get what you're getting.
We'll come back to that.
But yeah, vertical farming is good because you can produce a lot of food at a low cost very efficiently, right? I think it's one of the best places to do automation.
And without the risk.
Yes, that's a big one. And year round.
Yeah.
You get control of the environment.
You never know if there's going to be a drought, if there's going to be whatever. So, and this reminds me, before the vertical farming got big, in Yuma, they actually have these massive warehouses, the Nature Sweet tomatoes.
Really?
You look at those and you're just like, why are they always so consistent? Mm-hmm. They all look almost exactly the same. And again, it's because they have a massive multi-acre warehouse where they're able to control how much light and how much water and how much everything they get.
That's what they do. They experiment stuff at this bandbox, right?
So you get consistency without having to sacrifice, like a lot of food waste. I know there was a law in France where they made it illegal to throw away perfectly good food because there's a great documentary, by the way, that we'll have to pull a link to.
You could also eliminate fertilizer. Because you don't necessarily...
Potentially,
if you can create an environment where you just, pests can't get in, you don't need...
So pesticides, at least.
Yeah, I'm sorry, not fertilizer, excuse me. Pesticides.
You could probably minimize use of fertilizer as well. But pesticides, or at least recapture the fertilizer runoff.
And there's great versions of fertilizer that isn't bad, just using manure or compost. That's also a good way to use.
So here's where we come back to that easy-to-measure metric. Is whether it's honeybees, whether it's industrial farming, factory farming, all of this comes back to that mentality. And there's a great book, I think it was Michael Pollan's one of his earlier books, and he talks about Polyface Farm, and they actually took not a barren segment of land, but it was not high-quality farmland, and they pioneered this whole approach of rotating pigs, chickens, cows, I forget what else, and in this cycle where they would
I know that. Yeah. I know that well, yeah.
And so it's a lot of work, but it enriches the land. Yeah. And after a few years, that farmland is actually really excellent for growing stuff in. And again, this is the problem. Everyone could do that. We could have every company doing that, but it's cheaper. And so they throw a whole bunch of petroleum-based fertilizer on there because it's easier. Although on the long term, you're diminishing the quality of the soil. Right. You're leading to more runoff, both the fertilizer runoff, but also topsoil erosion, which is a massive kind of problem that most people are mostly unfamiliar with, but we're losing topsoil at a dangerous rate, and it's going to be a massive problem very soon. And it really, there are simple solutions. The honeybee thing too, I was actually shocked to learn. Everyone's like, "Oh, the bees are going to die, and we're all going to starve to death." No, the honeybees are going to die, and then we're going to have to use solitary bees, of which there are hundreds of different types. And we're going to have to give up about 1% to 2% of the land for permanent residences for solitary bees. Because you can't load them all into a truck and drive trucks of bees around the country where they're needed. You have to let each little solitary bee have a home in that environment. And they actually, per bee, they pollinate a lot better than the honeybees. But they're not amenable to being used industrially. So most of the problems we have, a lot of these doomsday problems, are just weird. We have an unhealthy fixation on those numbers, on that efficiency of having to have this many tons and always have more every month. And it's going to do us in because you can't grow forever. We have finite resources. Right. You've got to find equilibrium with something that works and that's stable, whether that's production or population. And that's honestly one of the most terrifying things to me right now. So that's another thing you'd have to do if you're building a society is get people to understand that growth forever doesn't work. I mean, maybe once we become an interstellar species, sure, we can expand and take over new planets like a plague and just, take all their resources and keep expanding forever because it take us, billions of years to expand throughout the universe. But until then, we've got to find something that actually has the ability to not grow exponentially, at a minimum not grow exponentially, because that's where we are now. Okay. And exponential goes real slow until all of a sudden really fast. Yeah.
So what would be the ideal way to build one of these farms then? These vertical farms, do you think?
Well, again, I don't know. I'm not an expert. I've always liked the idea, before they started calling it vertical farming, and I was influenced early as a kid. There was a thing downtown called the Solar Expo. I forget what year this was.
Uh-huh.
If it was late 80s, early 90s. It was in downtown Phoenix, and it was really cool. They had all these technologies. They were just showing off all these, like, how to live in the desert really well technologies. They had those passive evaporative cooling towers where they had no fan. They just have basically an evaporative cooler minus the fan with just the evap pads. And as the air, now you have to make it at least 3 stories tall for this to work, but as the air goes through and the water evaporates, it gets denser and it falls, and that makes a partial vacuum, which sucks more air through, and then that falls, and so it creates this feedback loop where it's incredible how much, like, the force of the air coming out of the bottom, and it's totally quiet because there's no fan. The only motor in there, the only energy that gets used is the motor circulating the water to keep the pads wet. And I remember standing in there as a kid, just this torrent of cold air is just blowing me over.
I want one of these.
I think they actually...
We don't have to, I melt all my podcast guests. I don't have the air conditioning on to help with audio quality.
Yeah.
So it'd be nice to have one that's
quiet. The problem is you'd have to add another 2 or 3 stories to your house here. So.
That's fine. Okay.
So they had that, and they had a hydroponics exhibit as well, and you could buy salad, and they had these tomatoes that were just hanging. It's kind of like when you go to the dry cleaners. They have the chain.
Yeah.
They have all these tomato plants hanging from that kind of a chain, and their roots were just hanging down. And so they were, I think, about 6 foot off the ground, and the roots would go through, and this was a display. This is not how you'd actually put it in production, but the roots would hang down, and they would have all these sprayers. I think technically it's aeroponics, not hydroponics, because they're just spraying the nutrients and water directly onto the roots. So you don't have to have a tub of this water. You're just spraying a mixture onto the roots and keeping them wet so they can absorb. And they would come out, and you could see the roots for just a few seconds while it came out around this one area, and then it'd go back in there and keep it all wet the whole time and come out. And it was really cool. So there's all these technologies that you could use to maximize your resources. And since then, I've been thinking about what if you took, like, a big box store that closed down? What if you had on the top level, now we have a lot of sun here, so probably the top 2 levels, you wouldn't necessarily want to let all the sunlight through, but if you did a checkerboard pattern of solar collectors, they have these, in Japan they use these solar collectors in the high-rises that have a panel, and it focuses the sunlight down, and it puts it into an optical fiber, and then it pipes that lower in the building, and then has a diffuser that lets that light then light a floor that's, an internal floor. So you could use the same technique where you had a checkerboard pattern where half the sunlight would get through to the top level, and you grow all the plants in there, so now you don't need artificial light, you're using natural light, and then half that light gets pumped down to the next floor via fiber optics, so it's still full spectrum sunlight. So you can grow let's say you have an acre-sized building, 2 full acres of fruit and whatever else, vegetables, etc., on the top 2 floors. Then below that, you could have a standard market. You have plenty of space to put all kinds of goods down there. And as you walk through, you could either have the food fresh picked that day, or you could even just have it where you'd say, oh yeah, I need like 2 tomatoes, and you could just leave it on the plant. And someone would run up and grab those, and you probably want to keep people out of the growing area just because if you can isolate that contamination, you won't have any pests. If you grow everything from seeds, you're not going to be getting bugs in there. You can seal it off. So you won't need any pesticides. You won't need to burn any fuel or any other resources trucking this stuff all over the place. The other thing that is most exciting to me is I try all kinds of weird fruit. I just finished off a quarter jackfruit I bought the other night. That stuff's addictive.
That's cool, really?
Yeah, it's really it's like a durian minus all the stinky terrifyingness.
I have no idea what a durian is.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah. I'll take you out. We'll go get some durian shakes.
All right, I'm down. Let's do it.
It looks like a medieval watermelon with these 1-inch angular spines, and durian is known for the smell. It's a very complex set of chemicals that give it its flavor. So jackfruit is that, smaller, rounder spines, minus all the stinky complexity, but still very complex tropical flavor, much more. Pineapple's kind of one note. A lot of these peaches and stuff are tasty, but they're like a one note. If you're thinking of music, it's just a single note, whereas jackfruit is like a chord, and durian's just like someone slamming their hands on the entire piano.
That's the way to put it.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
So, anyway, let's see if I remember my train of thought here, but some of these, some of the varieties. There's a book I came across a long time ago and it was free online. I wish I had copied the whole thing. But anyway, it's about $120 if you want to buy a copy, and it was Tropical Fruits of the World. And this was, as